I never thought a simple purchase could unravel my world. When my wife came home with a brand new, oversized bed, I smiled at first, pretending not to notice the strange tension in her eyes. But something felt off too many late nights, mysterious whispers on the phone, and a subtle hesitation whenever our eyes met. That night, as I lay awake on the smaller side of the bed, I realized I was sharing a life with a stranger in the skin of the woman I loved. The house felt colder, the air heavier, and the shadows in our rooms seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't supposed to hear. Little did I know, this bed was more than furniture. It was the stage for a betrayal that would shatter everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and loyalty. Before we dive deeper into this story, comment below with your location and local time. Let's see where you're joining from, and don't forget to subscribe to follow every twist and turn of this shocking tale. In the days that followed the arrival of the new bed, a quiet unease settled over our home. At first, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a harmless purchase, a desire for comfort, but the feeling gnawed at me relentlessly. I watched her carefully, noting the subtle changes in her behavior. She moved with a different rhythm now, a sort of elegance that seemed rehearsed, practiced. Her laughter, once warm and spontaneous, now felt polished, almost performative. I found myself questioning every word, every gesture, and every glance exchanged between us. My own reflections grew darker with each passing day. I remember the first time I noticed it clearly. She had stayed late at the office, or so she claimed. When she returned home, she carried herself as if she'd been on a secret mission rather than a routine day at work. Her coat smelled faintly of a cologne I didn't recognize, and there was a shimmer in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. I wanted to confront her, to demand explanations, but some part of me feared the answers. I feared the truth that had been hovering just beyond my grasp. It started with small observations, little inconsistencies that I tried to dismiss as coincidences. Her phone never left her side, and when it buzzed, she would pocket it quickly, smiling too brightly, as though aware of being watched. She began scheduling sudden trips to the store or late-night errands without me, always coming back with vague explanations. The bed, larger and more luxurious than anything we had before, became a silent witness to the growing distance between us. Its presence felt intrusive, almost accusatory, as if it carried within it the weight of the secrets that would soon surface. I tried to distract myself with work, immersing myself in projects that demanded my full attention. But even there, my mind wandered back home, imagining scenarios that I hated myself for entertaining. What was she hiding? Who was she meeting? The questions were endless, each one a dagger twisting deeper into the fragile trust I had built over years. I began noticing the subtle signs, the way she would glance over her shoulder when I entered a room, the almost imperceptible hesitation in her voice when I asked about her day, and the quiet sighs that escaped her lips when she thought I wasn't listening. One evening, curiosity and fear collided. I stayed up later than usual, pretending to read a book while watching her from the shadows. She moved with the grace of someone carrying a secret, tiptoeing through the rooms as if aware that someone's eyes were on her. Then I noticed the first real hint, a message flashing on her phone, quickly silenced, her fingers pausing just long enough for me to sense something was wrong. That pulse of realization struck me like ice. There was someone else, someone taller, someone who wasn't me, someone who occupied a space in her life that I had thought was mine alone. The days became a careful dance. I observed, calculated, waited. I noticed the perfume on her scarf, the unfamiliar sound of deep laughter echoing through the house when she thought I was asleep, and the occasional slip, a lingering touch on the screen of her phone, a smile too secretive to be innocent. The bed, now a constant reminder of the growing chasm between us, seemed to mock me. It was no longer a place of comfort or intimacy. It had transformed into a symbol of suspicion and fear. Each night, I lay awake on my side, staring at the ceiling, imagining him lying there instead of me, wondering what moments I had been denied. It wasn't just the physical presence I feared, it was the emotional betrayal, the quiet undermining of every promise we had made. I replayed memories in my mind, searching for signs I had missed. Was it the way she laughed at his jokes? The subtle admiration in her tone when recounting something she had seen or heard? I questioned my perception, doubted my instincts, yet deep down, I knew I was seeing what I feared most. Then came the day when the subtle hints could no longer be ignored. She mentioned a friend visiting the house while I was at work, casually, as if it were mundane. Something in the way she said it, the hesitation, the micro-expressions of guilt set off alarms in my mind. I asked casually, hoping to elicit a response that would confirm my fears without tipping my hand. But her answer was too smooth, too practiced. She smiled, laughed softly, and changed the subject, a technique she must have perfected. The confirmation of my suspicions, I realized, was imminent. I just had to wait for the right moment. During this period, I became hyper-aware of every detail in the house. The arrangement of furniture, the scent in each room, the faint echoes of movement. I noticed the small things that would have gone unnoticed before. A jacket draped over a chair, a glass left on the counter with lipstick marks not mine, a pen placed in a precise manner. Each discovery, small as it seemed, built a damning case in my mind. The larger bed, the extravagant centerpiece of our bedroom, became almost oppressive, looming over me as a symbol of the betrayal that was slowly revealing itself. I found myself oscillating between denial and confirmation. Part of me clung to hope, desperate for the comforting lie that all of this was in my head, that she was still the woman I married, but the evidence accumulated too consistently, the patterns too clear. I began noting her schedule meticulously, marking times when she would leave and return, cataloging every anomaly. My own reflection in the mirror showed a man consumed by suspicion, haunted by the invisible figure who now shared the life I once thought secure. And yet, amidst the fear and mounting dread, I felt a flicker of determination. I needed to know the truth, not just for my own peace of mind, but to reclaim the reality of my life. The suspense was suffocating, each day stretching endlessly as I waited for a revelation that would either devastate me or finally allow me to confront the shadow looming over my marriage. I became almost a detective in my own home, piecing together fragments of evidence, interpreting each gesture, each whispered conversation, each subtle shift in tone. The turning point arrived unexpectedly. I returned home early one afternoon, pretending to have forgotten a meeting, and found the house oddly quiet. The bed, gleaming under the sunlight, seemed to radiate an unspoken challenge. As I stepped quietly into the living room, I noticed something, a reflection in the window, a fleeting figure that did not belong. My pulse quickened, and my mind raced through possibilities. Was this the confirmation I had been bracing for, or merely a trick of the light? From that moment, I resolved to observe more closely, to document more diligently. I set up subtle cameras, arranged myself in hiding, and watched as the small, seemingly innocent routines of our home began to reveal a hidden narrative. Each day, the suspense grew. Each night, the anxiety deepened. I could feel the impending confrontation looming like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and unavoidable. The drama that had been simmering beneath the surface was about to erupt, and I knew that my life would never be the same again. I think the hardest part was not just discovering the betrayal. It was reconciling the woman I loved with the stranger who had crept into our lives. I recalled our vows, our shared dreams, the countless nights spent talking about the future, and contrasted them with the chilling reality unfolding before me. The juxtaposition was unbearable, each memory a knife twisting in my chest. And yet, even in this torment, I clung to one thought: I would see the truth, I would face it, and I would emerge with clarity, no matter how devastating the revelation. The larger bed had transformed into a stage, the silent witness to the unraveling of trust, and as I continued my observations, documenting each anomaly, each slip, each whisper, I realized that the truth was not a distant specter. It was already here, embedded in the very fabric of our home, waiting for me to uncover it. The stage was set, the players in position, and the moment of reckoning was approaching with relentless inevitability. The new bed dominated the room in a way that was almost oppressive. Its polished wood frame gleamed under the soft glow of the bedside lamps, and the mattress, impossibly plush, seemed to swallow any trace of the person lying upon it. I would lie awake on my side, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint creaks and groans of the house settling, trying to convince myself that it was just a bed, that it was nothing more than a material object, harmless and inert, yet every fiber of my being told me otherwise. There was an energy emanating from it, a presence that made the room feel charged, almost electric. The larger bed was a monument to something hidden, a silent herald of the secrets that had already begun to infiltrate our lives. She moved around the room with a newfound grace that unsettled me. The way she adjusted the sheets, smoothed the covers, and arranged the pillows seemed almost ceremonial, as though preparing the space for someone who was not me. The subtle details, her gaze lingering on the space where I lay, the faint smile playing on her lips when she thought I wasn't watching, were enough to set my imagination ablaze. I began noticing patterns in her behavior, small rituals and movements that seemed ordinary on the surface, but carried with them an unmistakable tension, a rhythm that whispered of another presence. Even our interactions began to shift. The conversations that once flowed freely now contained pauses, glances that darted away too quickly, and an undercurrent of unspoken thoughts. I could sense her guarding herself, building walls where none had existed before. The laughter we shared was lighter, less genuine, a performance that barely masked the complexity of her mind. I tried to reach her, to understand, but she had become a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit, each one hinting at a secret I was desperate to uncover. The bed became a focal point for my anxiety. Its size emphasized the distance I felt, the emotional void that had begun to grow between us. I would catch glimpses of her sitting there, tracing her fingers along the sheets as if memorizing some unseen pattern, a choreography that excluded me entirely. Nights became an ordeal. The physical space between us mirrored the emotional gap that widened with each passing day. Sleep was elusive, replaced by a restless vigilance that left me drained and hollow-eyed, constantly on edge, as though bracing for the inevitable. Then came the subtle signs, the seemingly trivial details that confirmed the storm I had feared. A faint cologne lingered in the sheets, unmistakably different from her usual scent. A pair of glasses I had never seen before rested on the nightstand, carefully positioned as if left deliberately for someone. A single strand of hair, lighter than hers, lay caught between the mattress and the frame. Each discovery was a dagger, a piece of evidence that chipped away at my denial, leaving me raw and exposed. The realization dawned slowly but relentlessly. The bed was not just a bed, it was a stage, and I had been watching the opening act of a betrayal that had been quietly orchestrated beneath my nose. I began tracking her every movement with meticulous attention. The office visits, the errands, the late-night outings, each one became a puzzle piece, each interaction a clue to the invisible presence that shared our home. I noted the times she returned, the changes in her tone when asked simple questions, the fleeting smiles that seemed addressed to someone else. The tension built, a crescendo that was impossible to ignore. I was living in a constant state of hyper-awareness. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant laugh amplified, each sound a potential revelation, each silence a harbinger of what was to come. I started noticing the emotional shifts too. Moments of affection, once natural, now felt measured, almost calculated. She would touch my arm briefly, just enough to acknowledge my presence, yet her eyes would betray a mind elsewhere, focused on someone who did not belong in our marriage. The intimacy we had shared, the whispered confessions, the quiet embraces, the late-night talks was being subtly replaced by something foreign, a presence that existed in parallel with my own. I could feel the betrayal, not just in actions, but in the very atmosphere of the room, thickening like fog, wrapping itself around my chest and making it difficult to breathe. I tried rationalizing, convincing myself that I was misreading signs, that the imagination could be a cruel trickster, but the evidence kept mounting, impossible to ignore. A misplaced cufflink, a sudden change in wardrobe, a smile that didn't reach the eyes, all pointed toward a reality I was reluctant to face. I began documenting everything, not out of obsession, but necessity. Each note, each observation, each mental catalog of anomalies served as a lifeline to the truth, a way to navigate the murky waters of suspicion and fear that had come to dominate our home. One evening, I noticed her adjusting the pillows with particular care. As though anticipating a visitor, I froze in the hallway, watching her from a distance, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. There was a rhythm to her movements, a precision that suggested familiarity. A routine performed, not for me, but for someone else. I caught a glimpse of her eyes, scanning the room with a mixture of anticipation and secrecy. And I realized that the new bed had become a symbol of exclusion. I was no longer the center of her world. Someone else had begun to occupy that space, silently, invisibly, yet undeniably. The psychological toll was immense. I felt a mix of rage, sadness, and helplessness that made it difficult to function. Every ordinary moment in the house, the kitchen, the living room, even the bathroom, was tainted by suspicion. I found myself questioning not just her actions, but my own perceptions, my own worth, the stability of the life I had built. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford, replaced by the constant vigilance of a man teetering on the edge of revelation. And yet, through the anxiety and fear, there was a growing resolve. I could not confront what I did not fully understand. I needed to observe, to gather the truth, to prepare for the moment when the facade would crumble. The larger bed, once a mere piece of furniture, had become the epicenter of a mystery that demanded resolution. I knew that the answers lay within its confines, in the patterns of behavior it had begun to reveal, in the subtle cues that whispered of another presence. Each night, I lay awake, imagining possibilities, envisioning scenarios both hopeful and horrifying. I thought of confrontations, apologies, denials, confessions, and vindications. I pondered the man who shared our space, tall, imposing, confident, a figure who had insinuated himself into our lives with a casual ease that enraged and terrified me simultaneously. The tension became unbearable, a constant pressure that made even mundane tasks feel surreal. The house itself seemed complicit, walls closing in, shadows stretching longer, whispers of what was to come echoing in every corner. And so, the larger bed remained, a silent testament to the unraveling of trust, a marker of the emotional battlefield that had emerged in my own home. It was both literal and symbolic, a reminder of absence and presence, of fidelity betrayed, of secrets held tightly. As I lay there, staring into the darkness, I realized that the stage was set, that the pieces were in place, and that the confrontation, when it came, would not be gentle. The bed was not just furniture, it was the herald of a reckoning, the axis around which the next chapter of our lives would revolve. The first real crack in the facade appeared one rainy afternoon. The sky outside was a dull gray, mirroring the heaviness in my chest as I watched her move through the house with an unusual purpose. She hummed softly, a tune I didn't recognize, and I felt the first twinge of jealousy, not for a stranger she might be with, but for the part of her that I could no longer reach. I tried to speak casually, asking about her day, but her answers were clipped, rehearsed. Each word felt weighed, calculated, as if measured for my ears alone. I wanted to press further, to expose the truth, but I hesitated. The fear of what I might discover was paralyzing, and the uncertainty was almost worse than the betrayal itself. It was in those small, suspended moments that I began to notice the subtle differences The way she smiled now, an almost imperceptible curl of the lips that seemed directed at someone else. The way her eyes lingered a fraction longer on the phone, scrolling through messages that she hid behind her palm. The shifts were minor, but consistent, forming a pattern that gnawed at my mind. I found myself cataloging everything, tracing each action and reaction with the meticulousness of someone unraveling a puzzle. The bed loomed in the background, silent and accusatory. As if it too were aware of the widening gap between us, I started to observe the small rituals that now punctuated our days. Her morning routine had changed subtly. She lingered longer in front of the mirror, selecting clothes with a care that seemed unnecessary, as though she were dressing not just for herself, but for an invisible audience. The scent of her perfume shifted, faint but unmistakable, leaving trails that suggested the presence of another. I became hyper-aware of the sounds in the house, the creak of the stairs, the faint shuffle of her movements, and I realized that the space we once shared as partners had transformed into a theater of secrets. Every glance, every movement carried a hidden meaning that I was desperate to decipher. The emotional toll was immense. I oscillated between hope and despair, longing for explanations, while simultaneously dreading the confirmation I suspected. Each day, I confronted a new layer of ambiguity, the fleeting touch of her hand on my shoulder, a whisper of laughter that didn't reach me, a glance that seemed to acknowledge someone else. I questioned my own perception, fearing that I was overreacting, imagining shadows where none existed. Yet the evidence mounted relentlessly, each instance compounding the weight of my suspicion. Then came the moment when the emotional distance became undeniable. She received a call while I was in the room, and I caught her expression shifting in a way that betrayed a duality I had been trying to ignore. There was warmth, intimacy, and familiarity in her tone that she no longer reserved for me. My heart constricted, a painful knot of jealousy, sorrow, and anger. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand the truth, but I knew that timing was everything. The revelation needed to be undeniable, undeniable enough that she could not mask it. Even with lies or charm, I began to pay closer attention to her interactions outside the home. The so-called errands and office trips took on new significance. Each step, each phone call, each delayed return became part of a growing tapestry of suspicion. I would sit in the living room, pretending to read, while my mind traced every detail, imagining possibilities that both terrified and intrigued me. The larger bed, an inanimate witness to my torment, now symbolized the emotional divide growing between us. It was more than furniture. It was a statement, a signpost of change, and a harbinger of the confrontation to come. Her demeanor around me shifted subtly as well. Affection became measured, intimacy constrained to socially acceptable gestures. Even our conversations, once flowing and honest, were now guarded, perfunctory. I could sense the effort it took for her to maintain this veneer of normalcy, the strain of hiding truths I was increasingly certain existed. The dissonance was almost unbearable. Each lie, each omission, carved a deeper chasm between us. I felt simultaneously invisible and painfully aware, a participant and an observer in a life that no longer seemed wholly mine. The psychological strain grew heavier with each passing day. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments, imagining scenarios, and planning the steps I would take to uncover the truth. The house itself seemed complicit, the walls closing in, the shadows stretching longer, the silence thickening, as if aware of the secrets being kept. I began to move through our home with a heightened sense of awareness, noting every detail, the arrangement of objects, the placement of personal items, even the smallest irregularities in her routines. Each anomaly was a clue, a thread to pull at, leading inevitably to the truth I feared yet craved. There were moments of doubt, moments when I tried to reconcile my fear with hope. Perhaps I was misreading the signs. Perhaps her behavior had explanations rooted in stress, or work, or the pressures of everyday life. But the pattern was too consistent, the deviations too precise, and the emotional distance too profound to ignore. I realized that I was observing more than actions. I was witnessing a transformation in our relationship, a subtle but undeniable shift in dynamics that signaled a breach of trust. The turning point arrived with a quiet afternoon at home. She mentioned a supposed friend visiting while I was away, casual, almost offhandedly, yet there was a hesitation in her voice, a pause that betrayed a hidden narrative. The simple mention of this person ignited a chain of recognition in my mind. The pieces fit together, the subtle smiles, the whispered conversations, the unexplained absences. The friend, I realized, was more than a friend. The invisible presence had been there all along, occupying a space that was once mine alone. From that day forward, I became a silent observer, cataloging and analyzing each interaction. Every gesture, every glance, every shift in tone was recorded in my mind with meticulous attention. I began setting small tests, watching her responses, gauging her reactions, and confirming the suspicions I had harbored for weeks. The bed, looming in the center of the room, was both my anchor and my tormentor, a silent witness to the unfolding drama, a stage for a betrayal that had already taken root. The emotional intensity of these moments was profound. I felt a mixture of heartbreak, rage, and helplessness, a cocktail of emotions that left me reeling. I was consumed by the need for clarity, for undeniable evidence, for the moment when the truth could no longer be denied. Nights were restless, days were tense, and every interaction was fraught with unspoken questions and the weight of anticipation. The once comfortable familiarity of our home had transformed into a labyrinth of suspicion and fear. Each room, a potential theater of revelation. And yet, amidst the turmoil, a part of me recognized a grim necessity. The truth, no matter how painful, had to be confronted. The observations, the patterns, the mounting evidence were all leading to an inevitable confrontation, a reckoning that would demand honesty, courage, and perhaps sacrifice. The bed had become more than a symbol. It was a catalyst, a silent instigator of the emotional journey that was about to unfold. The decision to follow her, to track her movements without her knowledge, was not made lightly. I wrestled with the morality of it, the ethics of invading her privacy. But the gnawing uncertainty was unbearable. Each day, I found myself standing at the edge of my own fear, peering into the unknown, driven by the desperate need to understand what was happening behind my back. I dressed in plain clothes, left the house inconspicuously, and trailed her silently, careful not to alert her to my presence. The city blurred around me, but my focus remained razor-sharp, trained solely on her figure, moving through the streets, her posture poised yet subtle, the rhythm of her steps both familiar and foreign. At first, the outing seemed innocent, mundane even. She walked to cafes, shopped at boutiques, stopped at the park benches we used to frequent together. But then, patterns began to emerge. Certain streets, certain buildings, certain times of day, these details began to form a map of something hidden. I noted the glances exchanged with people I didn't know, the subtle gestures that spoke volumes. Each smile, each nod, each fleeting touch of a hand hinted at a relationship that existed in parallel with my own. I felt the first real pangs of betrayal crystallize into certainty. The reality I had tried to deny was unfolding in full view, yet just out of reach, like a mirage. The longer I followed her, the more details became apparent. She would linger by a particular building, sometimes on the phone, sometimes simply waiting, always alert, always aware. I observed a tall man once, catching only glimpses as they passed each other, his stature imposing, his confidence unmistakable. There was an intimacy in the way they interacted, subtle but undeniable, gestures that were meant to be invisible to prying eyes, yet screamed the truth to anyone paying attention. I felt a cold shiver of recognition, a mixture of rage and despair that made my chest tighten. The betrayal was no longer a theory. It was a living, breathing reality. Despite the shock, I continued. Each observation, each detail, was a piece of the puzzle, a thread leading me inexorably toward the confrontation I knew I would face. I noticed the nuances, the way she laughed, the slight tilt of her head, the micro-expressions that revealed fleeting emotions she thought I couldn't see. The intricacies of human behavior became magnified under my scrutiny, and I realized that I was becoming an expert in reading the unspoken language of deceit. The betrayal was an art form, practiced meticulously, yet it bore the faintest imperfections, flaws that only someone who loved her, who knew her completely, could detect. The internal conflict was brutal. Part of me wanted to storm in, demand answers, and unleash the storm of anger and heartbreak that had been building inside. Another part urged caution, patience, a careful accumulation of irrefutable evidence before the confrontation. The nights were the hardest. I lay awake, replaying scenes in my mind, imagining what I might witness, anticipating her next moves, feeling every emotion simultaneously: fear, sorrow, rage, and a perverse curiosity that I could not deny. My world had become a careful choreography of observation and anticipation, each day stretching into an intricate web of suspense. There was a subtle thrill in the act of following her, though tainted with pain. Each step, each street, each interaction offered insight into the life she was living without me. The cafes and restaurants became stages, each encounter a performance, a secret unfolding in plain sight. I observed her entering a quiet, upscale bistro one afternoon, her movements precise, her smile directed not at me but at someone taller, whose presence exuded confidence and an unsettling ease. The realization hit me with brutal clarity. This was no fleeting encounter, no casual companionship. The man was deliberate, calculated, occupying a space that I had assumed belonged solely to me. The psychological toll intensified. I began seeing signs everywhere, in the reflection of windows, in the laughter drifting from open doors, in the fleeting glances of strangers who seemed to know something I did not. The city itself felt conspiratorial, as if conspiring to reveal the truth. At the precise moment of its cruelest impact, I noticed the small details: the scent of another cologne on her coat, the subtle crease of her smile when a message arrived, the way she adjusted her posture, tilting subtly to accommodate an invisible presence. Each sign compounded my understanding, cementing the reality of her betrayal. One day, I followed her to a secluded apartment building I had never noticed before. She waited in the lobby, pacing lightly, and then the door opened. He emerged tall, imposing, every bit the figure I had imagined yet dreaded to meet. Their embrace was fleeting, but intimate enough to confirm everything I had suspected. The sight twisted something deep within me, a combination of disbelief, anger, and grief that left me momentarily paralyzed. I had imagined scenarios, rehearsed confrontations in my mind, but nothing prepared me for the visceral reality of seeing them together. I retreated, hiding behind a column, heart pounding in my chest. My breath came shallow, rapid, as I processed the visual confirmation of the betrayal. Every emotion I had suppressed, fear, suspicion, hurt, love, anger, coalesced into a single sharp awareness: the person I loved, the woman I had built my life with, was giving pieces of herself to someone else. The mental images of shared nights, whispered dreams, and intimate moments now felt tainted, replaced by this stark, undeniable reality. Returning home that evening, I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and resolve. The act of following her had provided clarity, but also intensified the weight of what I was about to face. Each room in the house felt charged, the walls echoing with the unspoken truths that I had gathered. The bed, larger and more imposing than ever, stood at the center, a silent witness to the life I had assumed I still possessed, now infiltrated by a presence that did not belong. My gaze lingered on it, imagining the scenarios it had hosted, the intimacy it had witnessed without me. The imagery was almost unbearable, yet necessary. I needed to understand the full extent of the betrayal to prepare for the reckoning. In the following days, I became increasingly vigilant, mapping out her schedule, anticipating movements, and refining the details of my observations. I documented the subtle gestures, the changes in her tone, the almost imperceptible cues that signaled the presence of another. The psychological strain was immense. I felt isolated, trapped in a life that was no longer mine alone. Each glance at the bed reminded me of the distance that had grown between us, the intimacy now shared with another. Yet I clung to the knowledge that the confrontation was inevitable, that the culmination of this observation would bring the truth into full view, and with it, the opportunity for justice or closure. The bed had transformed into more than furniture. It was a symbol of exclusion, a monument to the betrayal that had been orchestrated meticulously behind my back. Each evening, as I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, I visualized the confrontation to come. I imagined revealing the evidence, confronting her with the truth, and witnessing the unraveling of carefully constructed lies. The suspense, the tension, the anticipation all became a part of my daily existence, a constant companion as I navigated the treacherous terrain of suspicion and heartbreak. Even amidst the emotional turbulence, a strange clarity emerged. I understood now that the act of following her was not merely voyeuristic or intrusive. It was a necessity, a way to reclaim agency over a reality that was slipping from my grasp. Each observation, each recorded detail, each carefully noted interaction brought me closer to the moment when I could no longer ignore the truth. The path was painful, the journey fraught with emotional peril, but I was committed to seeing it through. The stage was set, the players in position, and the moment of reckoning loomed with inevitability. The first undeniable clues began arriving in the most ordinary of ways, and yet their impact was anything but ordinary. One evening, as I pretended to be absorbed in a book while sitting in the living room, I noticed a faint vibration from her phone across the room. It was subtle, almost inconsequential, but my eyes caught the quick flash of the screen as she silenced it. Her expression shifted imperceptibly, just enough for my trained observation to detect it. A flicker of tension, a small smile, a hesitation in her movements. It was then that I realized the full magnitude of what I had suspected. Someone else had become a part of her life, quietly, insidiously, yet unmistakably. The man's presence was first revealed in snippets, messages that vanished too quickly for me to read, a name murmured in passing, a reference to plans I wasn't invited to. At first, I questioned myself. Was I imagining it? Was this paranoia, a product of sleepless nights and overactive suspicion? But the details kept aligning in a way too precise to dismiss. His existence was tangible, confirmed in glimpses, in scents that weren't mine, in the faint creases of familiarity when she thought I wasn't watching. Slowly, the web she had woven began to take shape before my eyes. I began noticing the subtle markers of his influence in our home. A scarf, impossibly high-end, draped over a chair, a coffee mug that didn't belong to us, placed carefully on the counter. These seemingly trivial objects carried enormous significance in my mind. Proof of a life intertwining with mine, yet remaining unseen. I cataloged each item mentally, noting its location, the time it appeared, and the way she interacted with it. My home, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a silent crime scene where every detail mattered, where the mundane became evidence of betrayal. The more I observed, the more meticulous she became, almost as if she sensed the scrutiny I was applying. She moved with precision, rehearsing behaviors that obscured the truth. The phone never left her side, hands instinctively covering the screen when a message arrived. Laughter came carefully, measured, never spontaneous. Even her tone shifted, softening at unexpected moments, as if engaging with someone else in a private conversation I could not intercept. It was infuriating, heartbreaking, and hypnotic all at once. I could not look away, could not stop my mind from piecing together the fragments of deception. The glimpses of him were tantalizing and torturous, tall, Broad-shouldered, confident, he occupied physical space in ways I had once imagined for myself. I caught fleeting glimpses and reflections in the corner of my eye, always careful to remain unseen. There was a rhythm to their interaction. Subtle gestures, touches, and expressions that spoke of intimacy without words. The betrayal was performed in silence, yet its presence was deafening. My heart would race, my stomach twist, as I observed the unthinkable, the intrusion of another man into the sanctuary of my home, into the private world we had built together. Despite the torment, I remained methodical. I noted the times she left the house, the duration of her absences, the patterns in her schedule. Each observation became a piece of a larger puzzle, a story that I could not yet fully articulate but was gradually comprehending. The bed, larger and more imposing than ever, became the center of my focus. It was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was the silent witness to the unfolding betrayal, the stage upon which secrets were enacted. I imagined him lying there, invisible yet present, occupying the space I had once thought sacred. I began tracking her interactions digitally as well. Subtle signs in her messages, the timing of notifications, the way she shielded her screen, all hinted at a correspondence with someone who was not me. Each notification became a potential revelation. Each vibrate a whisper of truths she was desperate to hide. I cataloged patterns, recognizing his influence in the cadence of her days and the choices she made. It was like piecing together a puzzle with only fragments, a jigsaw of deceit slowly forming an image too painful to contemplate fully. The psychological strain was immense. I felt as though I were living in a state of perpetual anticipation, the tension tightening around my chest like a vice. Sleep was fragmented, haunted by imagined confrontations, replayed scenarios, and the terrifying vision of her with him. Yet the clarity of observation provided a perverse comfort. If I could gather enough evidence, I could confront the truth with certainty. Until then, every moment of waiting was agonizing. Every small sign, a reminder of the emotional stakes. I noticed changes in her physical demeanor that betrayed her duplicity. The tilt of her head, the faint lift of a brow, the lingering glance toward empty spaces, all indicated someone else was occupying her thoughts, her attention, her desire. Even her gestures, once unconsciously intimate with me, now carried subtle modifications. I could see her adjusting movements, testing expressions, navigating a dual existence with a skillful grace that both impressed and enraged me. The intimacy I had shared with her felt contaminated, reframed in the context of the invisible presence who had claimed a portion of her affection. The tension escalated when I began to detect emotional cues that could not be feigned. Her expression softened at certain times. Her voice gained warmth that I was excluded from. Her laughter carried undertones meant for ears other than mine. These moments, brief yet searing, confirmed what I had feared and anticipated. She was emotionally entangled with him, deeply, deliberately. The reality crashed into me with visceral force, a blend of heartbreak and fury that rendered my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. One afternoon, she left a note on the kitchen counter, casually mentioning that she had spent time with a friend. The phrasing, innocent on the surface, held subtleties that were unmistakable. The omission of details, the casual tone, the strategic vagueness, all pointed to an unspoken truth. I held the note in my hands, feeling the weight of betrayal physically, a tangible manifestation of what had been invisible for weeks. My determination hardened. I would see this through, uncover the full scope of deception, and confront the reality that had been creeping into our lives unnoticed, yet devastatingly present. I started planning the next steps carefully. If I was to uncover the full truth, I needed to be strategic, patient, and observant. The man's appearances were sporadic but consistent, his presence marked by subtle yet undeniable traces, cologne on her clothes, laughter that carried over phone calls, messages I could only glimpse fleetingly. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, was crucial. My days became a calculated routine of observation, note-taking, and analysis, each moment sharpening the picture of the betrayal I had long suspected. The larger bed, once a symbol of comfort and shared intimacy, had become a repository of secrets and lies. Its size now felt oppressive, a reminder of the invisible presence that occupied the space I once held. Each night, lying awake, I traced the contours of the mattress with my mind, imagining the scenarios it had witnessed, the closeness it had held for someone other than me. It was an emotional torment compounded by the knowledge that the confrontation was inevitable and that the resolution, whether for justice or closure, would demand courage and clarity. The threads of their interactions, carefully observed, began forming a tapestry too clear to ignore. He was tall, confident, assertive, a presence that contrasted sharply with my own measured, cautious approach. The emotional and physical evidence of his intrusion into our lives mounted, and I understood that the facade of normalcy she maintained was collapsing slowly but inexorably. The bed, the house, the routines all were silent witnesses to a betrayal executed with precision, yet flawed in subtle ways that only someone who loved her completely could detect. By this point, I had reached a state of hypervigilance. Every knock at the door, every rustle of fabric, every muffled conversation triggered an acute awareness of the truth I was meticulously piecing together. The home had become a theater of observation, the bed the center of the stage, and I, the unwilling audience, absorbing the unfolding drama in real time. My mind teetered on the edge of despair and determination, haunted by the certainty that the moment of revelation was approaching, unavoidable and devastating. The realization of her duplicity grew sharper with every passing day. Each glance, each hesitation, each carefully measured response reinforced the notion that our lives were no longer entirely shared. I felt as though I were walking a tightrope, balanced precariously between denial and acknowledgement, hoping against hope that I might be wrong. Yet every subtle detail betrayed the truth I was trying to avoid. She carried herself differently now, lighter, more vibrant, in ways that didn't include me, her movements threaded with a secret rhythm that my mind strained to decode. The larger bed, once merely a fixture of comfort, now seemed to hold a silent accusation, a monument to the invisible life she was living alongside me. The tension in the household became palpable. I noticed how she interacted with me, touches that were deliberate but brief, smiles that seemed to reach only partway to my eyes, and conversations carefully sculpted to conceal the depth of her distraction. Even mundane questions about errands or appointments were met with overly precise answers, delivered with an almost rehearsed cadence. The subtlety of her deceit was breathtaking, a performance perfected over weeks, designed to keep me in the dark while revealing nothing. I felt simultaneously enraged and impotent, trapped in the confines of our home, aware of the betrayal, yet powerless to confront it without irrefutable proof. I began spending more time observing her patterns, noting the slight variations in her schedule. The ordinary moments walking the dog, making coffee, returning from the grocery store, became loaded with significance. Each act, each micro gesture, each pause, and each glance provided clues. My mind became a repository of data, cataloging the mundane alongside the extraordinary, searching for anomalies, searching for evidence of the man whose presence had become increasingly obvious. The bed, looming in our bedroom, was the focal point of these observations, a constant reminder of the divide growing between us. One evening, I noticed a subtle change in her tone during dinner. She laughed, soft and intimate, at something that had not been said aloud. Her eyes flicked in a direction that did not include me, a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of someone else's presence. The sensation of exclusion hit me like a physical blow, a wave of grief and fury that left me momentarily paralyzed. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand explanations, but I held back, realizing that premature confrontation would allow her to mask the truth. To preserve the illusion I was desperate to shatter, patience became a necessity. Even as it gnawed at my resolve, the psychological strain was compounded by the physical presence of the new bed. Each night, lying on my side, I could feel the enormity of the mattress, the empty space beside me, the invisible weight of someone else's shadow in the room. My sleep was restless, filled with dreams that were equal parts memory and fear, visions of her with him, scenarios of confrontations that played out in vivid detail, and imagined dialogues that cut to the core of my anxiety. The bed had transformed into a symbol of exclusion, of intimacy redirected, a silent yet unrelenting witness to the erosion of the life I had believed was secure. The turning point came subtly. Over weeks of observation and quiet calculation, I began noting the moments when she would leave the house, ostensibly for errands, and the exact timing of her phone calls. I became adept at predicting her movements, anticipating the subtle shifts in her expressions, and recognizing the microsigns that indicated his presence even when he was unseen. Each discovery, each validation of my suspicion, deepened both my anguish and my determination. The betrayal was no longer a theoretical concept. It was a living, breathing reality that I could trace, map, and observe with meticulous attention. I recall a particular afternoon when the tension became nearly unbearable. She had gone out, leaving behind the silent testament of her absence, the larger bed, perfectly made, untouched, yet charged with the knowledge of her secret life. I walked past it, imagining the scenarios that played out in its expanse, tracing the outlines of imagined gestures, feeling the phantom presence of him beside her. The emotional weight of this exercise was immense. It was as if the bed itself had absorbed every deceitful act, every whispered conversation, every hidden smile. The realization that our shared intimacy had been diluted, even stolen, became a crushing burden. I began to see signs of his influence everywhere. The clothes she selected, the perfume she wore, the way she arranged the cushions and blankets, subtle indicators of someone's taste other than mine. Each detail was a reminder that I was no longer the sole focus of her attention, that our life together had been infiltrated by an outsider who claimed, knowingly or not, a space I had believed untouchable. The psychological toll was relentless. I oscillated between anger and sorrow, between the desire to confront and the compulsion to wait until the evidence was undeniable. Her emotional distance was accompanied by small but unmistakable behavioral shifts. The way she spoke, the timing of her laughter, the fleeting softness in her eyes at unexpected moments, all revealed a duality I had not anticipated. It was a cruel clarity, the kind that leaves one simultaneously awed and devastated. I felt the silent presence of another in every corner of our home, a shadow that lingered in the very spaces we once shared. The bed had become more than furniture. It was a stage for performances I was no longer part of, a marker of the emotional and psychological divide that had grown insidiously over time. I took deliberate steps to preserve my sanity while gathering evidence. I documented her absences, noted patterns, and even began keeping mental records of specific phrases and gestures. I became a silent detective in my own home, piecing together the puzzle of her duplicity with painstaking care. The longer I watched, the more intricate the web appeared, the more deliberate the concealment, and the more determined I became to confront it fully prepared. Each observation was a step closer to understanding the full scope of the betrayal and preparing for the inevitable reckoning. Despite the mounting evidence, hope lingered, fragile yet persistent. Part of me wished for an explanation, for a reason that might absolve her of the emotional and moral breach I was certain was occurring. I clung to the possibility that I might be misreading the signs, that our life together still held the intimacy and trust I craved. But the consistency of her actions, the subtle markers of another's presence, and the shifting dynamics of our home left little room for doubt. The bed, so large and commanding, remained the epicenter of a truth I could no longer ignore, a truth that demanded confrontation, clarity, and courage. The moments leading up to that confrontation were tense, charged with anticipation. I would watch from a distance, waiting for signs that would confirm everything, preparing myself mentally for the scene I knew was imminent. Each night, lying awake, I imagined the revelation, the confrontation, the emotional storm that would follow. The bed loomed over me, a constant reminder of absence and presence, trust and betrayal, love and deceit. The stakes had never been higher, the emotional weight never heavier, and the inevitability of discovery pressed upon me with relentless force. And so I waited, observing, cataloging, preparing, each day, intensifying the suspense, each night stretching into an endless expanse of anxious anticipation. The drama had escalated beyond mere suspicion. It had become a precise, almost clinical awareness of the duplicity that had invaded my home, my life, and my heart. The stage was set, the players in motion, and the larger bed, the silent witness, stood at the center of it all, ready to reveal the truth in its full, devastating clarity. The decision to finally confront the situation crystallized in the quiet hours of one sleepless night. I knew that patience had brought me this far, that careful observation had provided undeniable evidence, but I also understood that waiting too long might allow her deceit to deepen, to solidify into a routine too entrenched to dismantle easily. My mind churned with scenarios, each one more harrowing than the last, confrontations exploding in rage, silent discussions fraught with accusation, the potential for her to deny, deflect, or manipulate the truth to maintain control. Yet, beneath the fear, a stubborn resolve burned. I would uncover the truth, fully and irreversibly, and I would face it head-on, no matter the personal cost. Preparation became an intricate exercise. In strategy, I set up subtle recording devices in rooms where her interactions were most telling, particularly near the bed, which had become the epicenter of the mystery and betrayal. Each camera was positioned to remain undetectable, capturing nuances of behavior, gestures, and expressions that would otherwise elude my perception. The psychological weight of these measures was significant. I felt both intrusive and justified, aware of the moral ambiguity, but compelled by the insatiable need for clarity. The larger bed, looming in the center of the room, seemed to pulse with tension, as if conscious of the emotional battle it had silently hosted for weeks. I meticulously planned my days, noting the precise times she left the house, when her phone buzzed with messages, and when unusual sounds echoed through the walls. Each anomaly became a data point, each interaction a clue. I began to notice minute behavioral cues, subtle shifts in her posture, a fleeting expression that betrayed anticipation, the softening of her voice when speaking into her phone. The tapestry of her duplicity was intricate, woven from countless small threads that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively painted a devastating picture. The emotional toll of this observation was immense, yet I pressed on, driven by the certainty that the truth must be confronted. One evening, I found myself lying in wait, hidden in the shadows of our own living room. As she prepared for a supposed evening out, I could see the subtle excitement in her eyes, the tension in her fingers as she adjusted her hair, the fleeting smiles that seemed directed at someone unseen. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, each second stretching endlessly, each small motion amplified in my perception. I felt the familiar pangs of betrayal and the mounting resolve to uncover what had been carefully concealed from me. Then, as if on cue, the first tangible manifestation of the affair appeared. Her phone lit up with a message, and she responded with a fluidity that betrayed intimacy and familiarity. The words were hidden, yet the gestures, the pauses, and the softness in her tone conveyed meaning without sound. My heart sank as I realized the depth of emotional entanglement that had developed beyond my awareness. Each passing moment reinforced the reality I had feared, confirming that her secret life had not only existed but thrived under my nose, right in the home we shared. I began taking careful notes, documenting every behavior, every departure, and every subtle sign of interaction with the other person. The process was painstaking, requiring meticulous attention to detail, but it became necessary to build a complete understanding of the betrayal. The bed, once a symbol of comfort and intimacy, had transformed into a silent witness, recording in its inanimate presence the subtle intricacies of deceit. Each night, I traced the contours of its plush surface in my mind, imagining the invisible presence that now occupied space I had once considered mine alone. The tension escalated further when I began to notice how she adapted her behavior in response to my attention. Small adjustments, minor shifts in tone or gesture, suggested a subconscious awareness of being observed. She moved with deliberate care, her actions imbued with a practiced precision designed to conceal the truth. Every step, every glance, every motion was part of a choreography I had yet to fully decipher. The longer I observed, the more apparent it became that the affair was not a fleeting indiscretion, but a deliberate, emotionally invested engagement with another man, a tall, confident presence who had infiltrated our life. In the days leading up to the planned confrontation, my life became a careful balance between vigilance and restraint. I watched her closely, noting the rhythms of her day, the timing of her absences, and the subtleties of her interactions with the unseen presence. The psychological burden was heavy. I oscillated between anger, grief, and a grudging fascination with the precision of her deceit. The home itself felt charged with tension, each room imbued with the history of intimacy now tainted by secrecy. The bed, larger and more imposing than ever, dominated my awareness, a constant reminder of the emotional and physical divide that had grown between us. The more I observed, the more precise my understanding became. The affair was no longer an abstract concept, but a tangible, living reality woven into the fabric of our everyday life. I recognized patterns, predicted behaviors, and anticipated encounters. Each observation strengthened my resolve, yet also deepened the sense of violation. The betrayal was not merely emotional, it had physical presence, occupying spaces once sacred to our partnership, altering the dynamic of our shared life in ways that were both subtle and profound. One particular afternoon crystallized the scope of the deception. She had gone out under the guise of a casual errand, and I followed discreetly, remaining at a distance that allowed observation without detection. I watched as she entered a quiet, unassuming building, a place that had never held significance before. Moments later, he appeared, a man tall, imposing, and confident. Their interaction, brief yet intimate, was unmistakable. Gestures, smiles, and unspoken communication that confirmed everything I had feared. I remained hidden, heart-pounding, witnessing the undeniable truth of what had been happening all along. The betrayal, once suspected and now observed, was now undeniable, stark, and devastatingly real. Returning home, I felt the weight of anticipation and preparation pressing upon me. The confrontation was no longer a distant event, it was imminent. I meticulously planned the steps I would take, the evidence I would present, and the questions I would ask. The bed, larger than life in the center of the room, was no longer just furniture. It was the epicenter of truth, a silent witness to the affair that had quietly invaded our lives. Every fiber of its fabric seemed to carry the weight of secrets, the echoes of laughter not meant for me, the traces of intimacy I was excluded from. In the nights that followed, I remained vigilant. The house seemed alive with the residue of the deceit. Each room filled with the tension of unspoken truths. I would watch, observe, and prepare, cataloging every detail, every nuance, every micro-expression. The larger bed loomed as a symbol of the divide between us, a constant reminder of what had been lost and what remained to be confronted. Each day brought me closer to the inevitable revelation, closer to the confrontation that would bring clarity, resolution, and perhaps the first steps toward reclaiming a life that had been infiltrated by deception. And so, the stage was set. The preparation, observation, and anticipation had all led to this moment, a delicate balance of patience and readiness, of fear and determination. I knew the confrontation would demand emotional fortitude, clarity of thought, and the courage to face the betrayal head on. The larger bed, the central figure in this silent drama, awaited the moment when the truth would finally emerge, and I would step forward to reclaim agency over the life that had been quietly, insidiously invaded. Life at home had become a theater of pretense. Each day was a delicate dance, performed under the guise of normalcy, yet beneath the surface, tension coiled like a predator waiting to strike. She moved through the rooms with effortless grace, her demeanor flawless, as if nothing had changed, but I could feel the undercurrent of deceit in every gesture. Her eyes, once candid and warm, now flickered with concealed thoughts, tracking invisible presences I had come to know through careful observation. The bed loomed in the center of our bedroom like a silent judge, a witness to the intimate spaces she now shared with someone else. Its presence amplified the tension, transforming the room into a stage for the unspoken drama that had quietly invaded our lives. I became hyper-aware of every small anomaly. The faint scent of another man's cologne on her coat, a misplaced item of clothing, an unfamiliar pen or notebook left behind. All these minor disruptions hinted at a parallel life she had cultivated with precision. I cataloged each detail meticulously, my mind forming a narrative built from fragments of observation and intuition. Every action she took seemed to be measured, deliberate, as if rehearsed for an audience invisible to me. The more I noticed, the clearer the patterns became, and the heavier the weight of anticipation pressed upon my chest. Even ordinary interactions were tinged with deception. She would ask about my day, listen with seeming interest, yet her expressions occasionally betrayed a private amusement, a hidden connection to someone else. I began to notice the subtle timing of her words, the way she chose phrases with care, the brief but telling glances toward empty spaces. It was maddening to witness the duality of her existence, the woman I had married and the stranger who had insinuated herself into my life simultaneously. My mind became a repository for these observations, an endless loop of scrutiny, as I tried to piece together the full extent of the betrayal before confronting it. The bed, central to our shared life, had taken on an almost oppressive significance. Its expansiveness highlighted the emotional chasm that had opened between us. I lay awake at night, imagining the invisible presence beside her, the intimacy that had been denied to me, the whispered conversations and touches that my senses could only infer. Sleep became impossible. Each night was a restless vigil, filled with imagined confrontations and the gnawing awareness of exclusion. The furniture that had once symbolized comfort now served as a daily reminder of the emotional distance that had grown in our home. I began observing her routines with greater intensity. The trips she claimed were mundane errands, the late-night visits to friends or family, the hours she spent seemingly alone, all became windows into a hidden life. I documented her schedule meticulously, noting the times she left and returned, the changes in her attire, the subtle shifts in her expressions. Each piece of data strengthened my understanding of the pattern, forming an unassailable narrative in my mind. The longer I observed, the more I recognized the emotional investment she had placed in someone else, and the clearer it became that this was not a fleeting infidelity, but a deliberate, sustained affair. The psychological strain was relentless. I oscillated between moments of fierce anger and deep sorrow, a turbulent sea of conflicting emotions that left me exhausted yet vigilant. I found myself scrutinizing every interaction, every nuance of her tone, every glance, for signs of guilt or hesitation. The larger bed became the focal point of this scrutiny, a constant presence in my mind, a canvas upon which the drama of betrayal was painted. It was no longer simply furniture, it was the stage for the clandestine intimacy that had invaded my life. One evening, I noticed a change in her behavior that confirmed my worst suspicions. She received a message while I was in the room and immediately softened her expression, lips curling into a smile that wasn't meant for me. Her body relaxed in a way that suggested familiarity, intimacy, and a sense of private connection. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach as I realized that the emotional bond she shared with another man had not only developed but flourished in secrecy. The subtlety of the interaction, the fleeting touch of her fingers, the glimmer in her eyes, the gentle tilt of her head was enough to make the betrayal undeniable, even without hearing a single word. The more I observed, the more sophisticated her concealment became. She moved with a deliberate fluidity, timing her actions to coincide with my attention or absence. Her gestures were precise, designed to obscure, to hide, to protect the secret life she had established. Each day revealed new layers of deception, small adjustments that, in isolation, might have seemed insignificant, yet collectively formed a narrative of infidelity I could no longer ignore. The psychological toll of observing her duplicity was immense. I felt trapped between the desire to confront and the need to gather indisputable evidence. The emotional strain was compounded by the physical space she shared with me and, secretly, with him. The bed, larger and more imposing than ever, had become a repository for the moments I was excluded from. I imagined the invisible presence beside her, the intimacy that had replaced the one we had shared, the whispers and touches I could only infer from the evidence. The contrast between the comfort of our home and the emotional void I experienced created a tension that was almost unbearable. Yet, I pressed on, compelled by the need for clarity and resolution. I began setting small tests to observe her responses, to gauge the presence of the other man, to confirm my suspicions beyond doubt. I left subtle traces, minor signals designed to elicit reactions that would betray the truth. Each response was analyzed, every micro-expression cataloged, and the pieces of the puzzle began to coalesce into a coherent image. The evidence was mounting, undeniable and stark. The betrayal was no longer hidden in shadows. It existed fully in the spaces I had once thought were private, in the routines we had built together, in the very bed that had become central to our lives. Her laughter, once a source of comfort and joy, now carried undertones of a secret connection. The tone of her voice, when speaking on the phone, the timing of her glances, and the soft gestures she made toward empty spaces all confirmed the presence of someone else. I felt the sting of exclusion acutely, a mixture of grief, anger, and helplessness that permeated every aspect of my existence. Yet within this turmoil, I found a resolute clarity. The confrontation, when it came, would be deliberate, informed, and unavoidable. The stage had been set by her own actions, and I was ready to meet the truth head-on. Each day, the anticipation grew. Every small interaction heightened the suspense. I cataloged evidence, planned the sequence of confrontation, and mentally rehearsed questions and statements to elicit honesty. The bed, now more than ever, symbolized both the betrayal and the path to revelation. Every night, spent awake, tracing the contours of the mattress in my imagination, every day spent observing her meticulously, brought me closer to the moment when the duplicity could no longer remain hidden. The emotional intensity was overwhelming, yet I pressed on, driven by the need for understanding and the inevitability of confrontation. Through all of this, the home itself seemed to participate in the drama. Shadows fell differently, objects were repositioned, and the air was thick with tension. Each room became a canvas for the unspoken narrative, the silent evidence of betrayal. I moved through our space like a detective in a crime scene, interpreting gestures, analyzing patterns, and preparing for the moment when all would be revealed. The larger bed stood as a central symbol, a monument to intimacy misused, secrecy maintained, and the emotional distance that had grown insidiously between us. And so, life continued under this tense veneer, a delicate balance of observation and pretense. I walked the fine line between patience and confrontation, carefully cataloging behaviors, studying patterns, and preparing myself for the revelation that was inevitable. The drama had evolved from suspicion to certainty, from uncertainty to detailed knowledge. Each day brought me closer to the confrontation that would finally expose the betrayal and the bed, the silent, looming witness, stood at the center of it all, a testament to the hidden truths that were about to surface. The evidence became impossible to ignore. Each day brought new confirmations of what I had long suspected, pieces of a puzzle that coalesced into a horrifying reality. I discovered messages that had been deleted too quickly for casual observation, but their echoes remained in the subtle changes in her behavior, lingering smiles, fleeting laughter, and an unmistakable light in her eyes whenever she thought no one was looking. I began to feel a combination of dread and grim determination. Every detail, every clue, every inconsistency led inexorably to the same conclusion: she was emotionally and physically involved with another man. The tall man, whose presence had become increasingly tangible, began to manifest in the details of our daily life. I noticed subtle traces of him, his cologne lingering faintly on her scarf, the faint impression of his weight in the mattress, and the way she arranged the bed in anticipation of a visit. I catalogued each observation with meticulous care, the pattern of infidelity revealing itself with growing clarity. Each detail, seemingly trivial on its own, together painted a vivid portrait of betrayal. My chest tightened with each confirmation, a mixture of fury, grief, and disbelief intertwining in a way that left me emotionally raw and exhausted. The psychological toll was immense. I oscillated between the desire to confront her immediately and the need for irrefutable evidence. The bed, the central symbol of my growing anguish, became a site of mental obsession. I would lie awake, imagining him there, tracing the space where I had once shared intimate nights with her. The mattress now hosting gestures, touches, and whispers that were mine no longer. The sense of exclusion was suffocating, yet I knew that patience and careful observation were necessary if I were to expose the truth beyond doubt. Then came the day when the pattern became undeniable. She had gone out under the guise of running errands, leaving the house ostensibly empty. I followed, keeping a discreet distance, my heart hammering with a mixture of anticipation and dread. At a quiet apartment building I had never noticed before, she entered with precise, deliberate movements. Moments later, he appeared. Tall, confident, and commanding in presence, he exuded an aura of ease and entitlement. Their interaction, brief yet intimate, left no room for doubt. He was the person who had quietly inserted himself into our lives, occupying the emotional space that I had assumed was mine alone. I observed them with a mix of horror and fascination. The gestures were subtle, but telling a brief touch of a hand, a shared smile, a quiet conversation whispered in a tone too private for my ears. The betrayal, once abstract and unconfirmed, now revealed itself in full clarity. I felt a visceral mix of rage and heartbreak, a storm of emotions that left me breathless. Yet, I remained hidden, knowing that premature confrontation could allow them to adjust, to conceal the truth further, and to avoid the reckoning I had meticulously prepared for. Returning home that evening, the weight of the evidence pressed down on me like a physical force. The bed, now impossibly large and central, seemed to embody the betrayal itself. Each night, I imagined the invisible presence beside her, the intimacy I had lost, the whispered words exchanged in secrecy. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a stage for deceit, and I, unwillingly cast as the observer, catalogued every subtle motion, every hidden smile, every sign that confirmed the existence of a life I was being excluded from. I became methodical in my documentation. Each interaction, each gesture, each anomaly in her behavior was catalogued in my mind, forming a detailed timeline of deception. I began noting times of day, changes in tone, and subtle behavioral cues, anything that could serve as evidence when the confrontation finally came. The bed, the silent witness, seemed to preside over my observations, its presence a constant reminder of the intimacy that had been stolen from me. I imagined the countless nights she had shared with him, the private moments enacted on that mattress, and the weight of the betrayal settled like a stone in my chest. The anticipation of confrontation was both terrifying and necessary. I had observed, documented, and confirmed the infidelity in ways that left no room for denial. Yet the emotional toll was profound. Every glance at her, every casual interaction felt laden with subtext. Every room in the house seemed charged with tension. I became hyper-vigilant, reading her gestures, parsing her words, and interpreting each motion with surgical precision. The psychological pressure was relentless, yet I understood that the reckoning must be deliberate, informed, and inevitable. I noticed subtle changes in her behavior that further confirmed the depth of her engagement with him. Her laughter carried undertones of intimacy, not meant for me. Her touch was measured and precise, and her gaze often lingered toward spaces where his presence had once been. The bed, larger than life in the center of our room, remained a physical and symbolic reminder of the emotional void, the secrets enacted upon its surface, and the betrayal that had infiltrated the core of our home. Each night, I lay awake, tracing the contours in my imagination, visualizing the moments that had occurred without my knowledge, the whispers and touches I could only infer. The preparation for confrontation took on meticulous precision. I determined the sequence of steps, the questions to ask, and the evidence to present. Every observation, every subtle cue, every tiny irregularity documented over weeks became part of the strategy. The bed, central to the unfolding drama, loomed as both witness and symbol, a silent testament to the life that had been partially stolen, to the emotional and physical intimacy redirected, and to the inevitable moment of reckoning, approaching with relentless certainty. Finally, the day approached when observation alone would no longer suffice. The evidence was irrefutable, the patterns undeniable, and the betrayal fully visible. I prepared myself mentally for the confrontation, rehearsing the dialogue, anticipating denials and excuses, and steeling myself for the emotional storm that would follow. The bed, still dominant in the center of the room, represented both the culmination of weeks of observation and the stage upon which the truth would finally emerge. I understood that the next steps would define the closure, the justice, and the emotional resolution I sought. Throughout this period, the tension of waiting became almost unbearable. Every interaction with her, no matter how casual, carried layers of unspoken truth. Her gestures, her expressions, and her speech all hinted at a private world that I had been excluded from. The larger bed, symbolic of her emotional and physical engagement with another man, dominated my thoughts, a silent reminder of the betrayal that had infiltrated the core of our lives. Yet I remained patient, deliberate, and methodical, knowing that the culmination of my observations would allow the confrontation to occur on my terms. Fully informed and unavoidable, I understood, with painful clarity, that the betrayal was not merely a singular act, but a sustained presence in our lives. Every smile, every gesture, every unspoken communication with him had woven itself into the fabric of our home. The bed, as central to intimacy as it was, had become the focal point of that fabric, hosting moments of secrecy, emotional entanglement, and physical connection that I had once assumed were shared exclusively with me. The anticipation of revealing this truth, while emotionally taxing, became my guiding purpose, preparing me for the confrontation that would finally bring clarity and resolution. The house, once a sanctuary of shared life, had become a theater for observation, strategy, and emotional preparation. Every room carried the weight of secrecy, every object was a potential clue. The larger bed, dominant in the bedroom, presided over this theater, its surface a silent record of the affair that had quietly taken shape. I understood that the confrontation would be inevitable, and that the evidence I had meticulously gathered would ensure that the truth could no longer be denied, hidden, or distorted. The stage was set, the players in position, and the moment of reckoning approached with the inevitability of a tide reaching the shore. The emotional weight of what I had discovered became almost unbearable. Every moment at home carried a heightened intensity, a tension so thick It felt like it pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I watched her carefully, noticing nuances I had once overlooked. The subtle shifts in posture, the flicker of emotion across her face, the way she spoke to me with a precision that suggested self-restraint. Even the smallest gestures, the way she handled a cup of coffee or adjusted the cushions on the bed, became laden with significance, hints of a life that was no longer entirely shared with me. I was caught in a liminal space, between observation and confrontation, between hope and despair, between love and the betrayal that had taken root in our home. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining the invisible presence beside her, replaying her interactions in my mind, tracing the subtle cues of intimacy I had been excluded from. The bed, larger and more dominant than ever, had become both a literal and symbolic witness. It held traces of moments I could only imagine, whispers, touches, laughter, all directed towards someone else. My mind oscillated between rage and grief, between the need for confrontation and the desire to wait for absolute clarity. The duality of my emotional state left me drained, teetering on the edge of obsession, yet strangely determined. The day-to-day routine became a careful performance. I went about my own activities with an air of normalcy, while internally cataloging every anomaly, every deviation, every subtle signal that confirmed the reality I had been slowly uncovering. Her laughter, her tone, the rhythm of her steps, all were scrutinized and analyzed. The psychological pressure was immense, a constant reminder that I was observing someone I loved being emotionally intimate with another man. The longer this went on, the more I realized that the betrayal was not merely a momentary lapse, but a carefully constructed reality that had crept into our lives incrementally, so subtle that I had almost missed it entirely. The turning point for me came during a seemingly ordinary evening. She had stepped out for what she claimed was a brief errand, leaving the house quiet and still. I waited, tense and alert, knowing that each passing minute could reveal evidence of the affair I had been tracking. When she returned, I noticed small changes in her demeanor, a flicker of nervousness, a hesitation in her step, a subtle softness in her voice that seemed out of place. These micro-expressions were like a key turning in a lock, opening a door to the undeniable truth. The man I had been observing had not only occupied her thoughts, but had begun to shape her behavior even in my presence. The psychological struggle became a constant companion. I found myself questioning my own worth, replaying memories of intimacy, now tainted by the shadow of another. The betrayal was not simply about physical presence, but about emotional investment, about trust eroded over time. I grappled with a whirlpool of emotions: grief for the moment stolen, rage at the deception, confusion over my own feelings, and a stubborn determination to reclaim agency over the situation. Each observation sharpened my resolve. Even as it deepened my pain, I started planning how I would confront her, not with reckless anger, not with hasty accusations, but with calculated precision. I reviewed the evidence I had collected, mentally rehearsing questions, responses, and strategies. Each detail mattered: the timing of messages, the subtle shifts in her behavior, the patterns I had meticulously recorded. The bed, silent and immovable, remained central to this preparation. Its sheer size, the expanse that symbolized absence and presence simultaneously, became a mental focal point, a reminder of the hidden intimacy it had witnessed and the confrontation that was fast approaching. Observing her interactions became a mixture of detective work and emotional endurance. I noted the timing of her phone calls, the faint traces of his presence in the household, and the way she would adjust her behavior when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Each subtle cue reinforced the reality I had been building in my mind. The affair was deliberate, emotionally charged, and ongoing. The bed itself seemed to dominate these observations, a tangible monument to moments I had been excluded from and gestures that had been redirected to someone else. The strain on my mind and body was immense. I slept less, my focus sharpened, and my patience became both a weapon and a source of torment. I replayed scenarios, imagined confrontations, and considered every possible response. The emotional intensity left me both drained and alert, a paradox of exhaustion and vigilance. I understood that the moment of reckoning would not only demand evidence, but also emotional fortitude. The psychological preparation was as critical as the physical evidence I had amassed, and the larger bed loomed over every consideration, a reminder of what had been lost and what must be confronted. One particularly revealing day, I observed her preparing for an evening I had not been invited to. She moved through the bedroom with deliberate care, smoothing the sheets, adjusting pillows, and checking the arrangement of the bed as if rehearsing for someone's arrival. Her movements were precise, measured, and deliberate gestures I had once performed with her, now appropriated for someone else. The realization struck me like a physical blow. The bed had become a stage for private intimacy in my absence, a focal point of emotional and physical connection with the man whose presence I had been tracking for weeks. The longer I watched, the more apparent the depth of the emotional entanglement became. Her laughter at unseen messages, the subtle softness in her eyes when she thought I wasn't observing, and the deliberate arrangement of our shared space all pointed toward a deliberate, sustained engagement. It was a betrayal layered in nuance, executed with care, yet flawed in ways that only someone who knew her completely could discern. My mind cataloged every nuance, every micro-expression, every slight deviation from her usual behavior, forming a complete narrative of deceit that was impossible to ignore. Despite the pain, I recognized the necessity of this observation. I could not confront what I did not fully understand. Each day of scrutiny, each note, each mental record brought me closer to clarity and certainty. The bed, larger and more imposing than ever, stood at the center of this unfolding revelation, a constant reminder of the betrayal and the preparation required for confrontation. I understood that emotional fortitude, strategic patience, and meticulous attention to detail were essential to navigate the storm that was about to break in our home. The psychological burden was immense, yet the clarity of observation provided a grim sort of comfort. I knew the confrontation was inevitable. The evidence I had painstakingly gathered would leave no room for denial or deflection. Each night, lying awake, I traced the contours of the bed in my imagination, envisioning the moments it had witnessed, the intimacy it had silently hosted, and the emotional distance that had grown between us. The preparation, the observation, the anticipation, all were converging toward a decisive moment of reckoning that would finally reveal the full extent of the betrayal and allow me to reclaim agency over the narrative of my life. By this point, the emotional intensity had reached a crescendo. Every action, every gesture, every nuance of her behavior was amplified in my perception. The larger bed, central to both our daily life and the unfolding drama, remained the constant focal point. I cataloged each detail, interpreted each subtlety, and prepared mentally for the confrontation that would bring clarity, resolution, and a form of justice. The stakes were at their highest, the tension unrelenting, and the psychological landscape of our home had transformed into a theater where secrets and betrayals were waiting to be exposed. The culmination of these observations, the mental and emotional preparation, and the mounting evidence coalesced into a single understanding. The confrontation was inevitable, and it would be definitive. The bed, once merely a piece of furniture, had become the central witness to the affair, the silent recorder of moments I had been excluded from, and the stage upon which truth would finally be unveiled. Every day of patience, every night of vigilance, every painstaking note had led to this moment, the moment when I would face the reality of her betrayal and navigate the storm it had created. The day I caught them arrived with a quiet inevitability that made the tension almost unbearable. I had spent weeks, perhaps months, meticulously tracking her routines, observing patterns, and mentally preparing for the confrontation that would finally bring clarity. But nothing could have truly prepared me for the moment when the abstract horror of suspicion became concrete reality. I arrived home early, claiming a sudden work commitment had ended sooner than expected, and entered the house silently, careful not to announce my presence. The rooms were eerily still, filled with the kind of quiet that precedes revelation. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of air felt magnified, as if the house itself knew what was about to unfold. As I approached the bedroom, I caught a glimpse of her from the corner of my eye. She moved with a familiar grace, yet there was a foreignness in her demeanor, a subtle awareness of someone else's presence that I had been tracking but had never seen manifest so clearly. Then I saw him, the tall man, imposing and confident, stood near the bed, his body relaxed in a way that suggested familiarity and entitlement. He was exactly as I had imagined, from the fragments of evidence and fleeting glimpses, yet the reality was more jarring, more visceral. The intimate proximity between them, the casual comfort in each other's presence, and the ease with which they interacted shattered the last vestiges of denial I had clung to. Their conversation was muted, soft enough to be inaudible, yet every gesture, every glance, every nuanced expression spoke volumes. I watched as she adjusted the pillows, moving them with deliberate care. Her eyes meeting his, with an intimacy that had once been reserved for me, the realization that she had shared these moments, in this very room, with someone else was a physical blow. My chest tightened, and a mix of fury, heartbreak, and disbelief surged through me, leaving me momentarily frozen. The bed, the silent witness, seemed to loom even larger, its expanse a cruel reminder of the emotional and physical space I had been denied. I observed them from the shadows, my mind racing through the countless scenarios I had imagined over the weeks of preparation. All of them paled in comparison to the vivid, undeniable truth unfolding before me. Every small detail confirmed what I had long suspected. She was deeply entangled with him, emotionally and physically. Their gestures, the subtle touches, the shared laughter, the way she moved for him, all were evidence of a bond that had grown in secret, right under my nose, in the home I thought we shared equally. The betrayal was now tangible, visible, and impossible to ignore. The intensity of the moment was almost overwhelming. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, grief, sorrow, and a profound sense of violation. Yet beneath the emotional storm was a grim clarity. I had anticipated this moment, prepared for it meticulously, and now that it had arrived, I could witness it fully, without the ambiguity that had haunted me for so long. Every observation I had made, every note I had taken, every subtle clue I had tracked, all coalesced into this undeniable revelation. The bed, larger and more central than ever, remained the silent arbiter, holding the intimate details of the betrayal like a record waiting to be read. As I continued to watch, I noticed the subtle micro-expressions that revealed the depth of their emotional connection. Her eyes softened at times, her fingers lingered slightly on his arm, and her voice carried tones of warmth and familiarity that I had not heard directed toward me in months. Each gesture, each glance, each movement was a testament to the intimacy that had quietly developed. I felt the sting of exclusion acutely, as though I were watching a life I had once been central to being shared with someone else. The emotional weight pressed upon me, a suffocating mixture of grief and rage. Yet I remained in my hidden vantage point, absorbing every detail. The atmosphere in the room was charged, electric with the unspoken dynamics of betrayal. He leaned casually against the bed, tall and imposing, his confidence evident in every movement. She moved fluidly around him, performing gestures I had once shared with her, now directed toward another. The realization struck me with a clarity that was almost physical. The life we had built together, the intimacy, the trust, the shared experiences had been infiltrated, reshaped, and partially stolen. I felt a combination of helplessness and determination, knowing that the confrontation could no longer be delayed. The evidence was undeniable. The betrayal was manifest. Finally, unable to contain the intensity of the moment, I stepped forward. The sound of my movement startled them both. She turned, eyes widening in recognition, a flash of guilt and panic crossing her face. He shifted instinctively, a faint tension replacing his previously confident demeanor. The room, once a private stage for their secret connection, was now exposed. I felt the raw surge of emotions, rage, heartbreak, and the urgent need for answers coursing through me. The confrontation had begun. My voice, though controlled, carried the weight of weeks of observation, suspicion, and preparation. I demanded explanations, seeking the truths I had long suspected. She faltered, attempting to mask her guilt with rehearsed denials and half-truths, but the evidence was irrefutable. The subtle cues, the gestures, the phone messages, the altered routines, all pointed to a narrative she could no longer hide. The tall man remained tense, aware of the gravity of the situation, yet there was no room for evasion. The confrontation, long anticipated, had stripped away the layers of deceit, revealing the stark reality of betrayal in the center of our home. The emotional exchange was intense, raw, and unforgiving. Accusations and denials collided with tears, rage, and heartbreak. The betrayal was laid bare, the carefully maintained facade shattered, and the dynamics that had defined our home were irrevocably altered. The bed, larger than life, in the center of the room, bore silent witness to this reckoning. Its expanse, once a symbol of shared intimacy, now held the weight of exposure, truth, and the confrontation that had finally brought the hidden realities to light. In that moment, I saw her vulnerability, the cracks in her composure, and the human cost of deception. The tall man's confidence waned under the intensity of exposure. I, standing amidst the ruins of trust and intimacy, felt a mix of vindication and sorrow. The confrontation, inevitable and meticulously anticipated, had brought clarity and resolution. The evidence I had gathered, the observations I had made, and the patience I had exercised had culminated in this undeniable revelation. The betrayal, once abstract, was now tangible, fully realized, and confronted. The aftermath of the confrontation left the room heavy with silence, punctuated only by the echoes of what had been revealed. The bed, central to the drama, remained a stark reminder of the intimacy that had been misdirected and the secrets that had been maintained until now. I felt a complex mixture of relief, grief, and exhaustion. The emotional storm had reached its peak, and the reality of the betrayal had been acknowledged openly. The confrontation had stripped away ambiguity, leaving clarity, however painful, in its place. From that day forward, the dynamics of our home were irrevocably changed. The larger bed, once a site of comfort and shared intimacy, had become a monument to the betrayal, a symbol of the emotional and physical divide that had been created. The confrontation had revealed the truth, unmasked the duplicity, and forced all parties to confront the consequences of their actions. I understood that the path to healing and understanding would be long and complex, but the clarity brought by this moment provided the foundation for the next steps. The lessons were profound. Trust, once broken, required deliberate acknowledgement and confrontation. The meticulous observation, preparation, and patience that had guided me to this moment were essential in transforming suspicion into undeniable truth. The bed, as central to both the betrayal and the confrontation, had witnessed the unraveling of deceit and the emergence of clarity. Its presence would forever remain a symbol of the emotional complexities, the hidden dynamics, and the inevitability of truth when carefully sought and confronted. The confrontation was nothing like I had imagined in the quiet hours of speculation and planning. The reality of facing her and him in the same room, in our home, the place that had been my sanctuary, was far more intense, far more raw than any mental rehearsal could have prepared me for. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped fully into the bedroom, the bed looming between us like an insurmountable divide. She froze, her eyes widening in shock, guilt flashing across her features in an instant. The tall man, confident and poised in all our mental constructions, now seemed smaller under the weight of exposure, his ease replaced by a tense awareness that the facade had been shattered. "Explain this," I said, my voice tight but controlled, every word weighted with weeks of observation, doubt, and emotional torment. The room was thick with unspoken tension, charged with the intensity of betrayal finally laid bare. She stumbled over her words, attempting to deflect, to justify, to hide behind the veil of excuses she had so carefully crafted over months. But the evidence, the trail of phone messages, the subtle emotional cues, the small items scattered around the house, the meticulous record I had kept was undeniable. Every attempt at denial faltered, weakened by the incontrovertible truth that now stood in front of her. I observed her reactions closely. Every micro-expression betrayed the truth. A fleeting downward glance, a trembling hand, a sigh barely audible. The intimate familiarity she had displayed with him was no longer hidden in whispers or gestures behind closed doors. It was fully exposed, amplified by the presence of my scrutiny. My mind catalogued each movement, each word, each subtle hesitation. The confrontation was not merely a verbal exchange. It was an unmasking, a dissection of deceit that had grown in the shadows of our home. The larger bed between us seemed almost to pulse with tension, a silent witness to the truths being revealed, the intimacy misappropriated, and the emotional reckoning unfolding in real time. He, the tall man, shifted under my gaze, his confident demeanor faltering. The casual arrogance I had imagined from my distant observations dissolved in the face of scrutiny. He had intruded upon our lives, infiltrated our home, and occupied the emotional and physical space that was rightfully mine. Now, confronted directly, he seemed to shrink, the power of secrecy stripped away by the presence of the evidence and my unwavering observation. Each glance I cast upon him was not just accusation, but the assertion of boundaries, a reclamation of agency over a reality that had been quietly stolen from me. She began speaking, words flowing in uneven bursts, an attempt to explain, to justify, to salvage something from the wreckage of trust. But the language of deceit, once subtle and practiced, now fell flat under the scrutiny of truth. I could see the cracks in her narrative, the inconsistencies, the hesitation that betrayed the emotional and moral compromises she had made. The intimacy she had redirected toward him was impossible to disguise, and the room was charged with the collision of lies and reality. The bed, central to the drama, had silently observed each misstep, each omission, each unspoken gesture, and now it held the weight of exposure, like a judge presiding over a trial of emotional fidelity. I confronted him directly, my voice measured but firm. "You've crossed boundaries that don't belong to you," I said, the words carrying the weight of betrayal, anger, and moral clarity. His response was a mixture of defensiveness and arrogance, but it lacked the subtlety he had once employed in secrecy. The exposure of intimacy, now brought into full view, left him visibly disarmed. Every gesture, every posture, every interaction between the three of us became amplified under the gravity of confrontation. The bed, the stage of so many clandestine moments, remained central, a silent observer of the unmasking of duplicity. The emotional intensity escalated rapidly. Tears, accusations, apologies, none fully sufficed to repair or conceal the damage. The room became a crucible for truth, where every carefully constructed lie dissolved under the light of observation and confrontation. Her attempts at justification faltered. His presence, once dominant in secret, diminished under scrutiny, and I stood, a witness and arbiter of the reality that had been carefully hidden from me. The psychological and emotional toll of the confrontation was immense, yet it provided clarity, a culmination of weeks of meticulous observation and preparation. In the moments that followed, I realized the depth of emotional engagement she had cultivated with him. The gestures, the intimate familiarity, the unspoken communication, everything that had been hidden now lay exposed. The betrayal, once theoretical, became fully realized in its emotional and physical dimensions. The bed, the larger central fixture in the room, bore silent testimony to each act, each touch, each whispered moment of connection. It had been a stage for deceit, and now it stood as a stark reminder of the consequences of secrecy and emotional infidelity. The confrontation was raw and unfiltered. Words collided, emotions surged, and the truth emerged fully, irreversibly. I demanded explanations, seeking to understand the motives, the choices, and the intentions behind the betrayal. She faltered, attempting to mitigate responsibility. Yet the evidence was overwhelming. The tall man, confronted directly, there was no longer the confident figure I had imagined. From a distance, his presence diminished in the face of exposure. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably, the power of secrecy had been stripped away, leaving only the stark reality of emotional and moral transgression. In the aftermath, the emotional intensity remained palpable. The room, once a sanctuary of intimacy and shared life, had been transformed into a space of reckoning. The bed, still central, embodied the betrayal, the confrontation, and the unmasking of truth. Every fiber of its fabric seemed to resonate with the acts it had silently witnessed. I felt a complex mixture of relief, sorrow, anger, and exhaustion. The confrontation had delivered clarity, yet it had also crystallized the depth of the betrayal. Through the emotional storm, a grim clarity emerged. I understood that trust, once broken, demanded confrontation, observation, and undeniable evidence. The larger bed, the silent witness, had presided over the betrayal and the confrontation, marking both the theft of intimacy and the exposure of truth. The psychological impact of observing, preparing, and confronting had been profound, yet it provided a foundation for reclaiming agency over a life that had been infiltrated and emotionally compromised. The confrontation, while devastating, was necessary. It revealed the depth of deception, the emotional entanglement, and the moral consequences of the choices made. The bed, once a symbol of comfort and shared life, had been transformed into a monument to betrayal, observation, and exposure. Its presence was a constant reminder of the intimacy redirected, the secrets maintained, and the necessity of confronting reality directly. In this moment, the dynamics of our home and our relationships were irrevocably altered, with the clarity of truth now firmly established. As the confrontation drew to a close, the emotional landscape of the room began to settle, leaving a mixture of exhaustion, resolution, and tentative understanding. The bed remained central, a silent witness to the culmination of observation, the exposure of deceit, and the emotional reckoning that had unfolded. I recognized the necessity of this confrontation, the value of meticulous preparation, and the inevitability of truth when carefully sought. The home, once a theater of secrecy, had become a space of revelation where betrayal was confronted and clarity emerged from the shadows of deceit. The consequences were immediate and profound. Trust had been shattered, yet the confrontation provided an unambiguous account of reality. The larger bed, the stage of intimacy misappropriated, now stood as a testament to both the betrayal and the necessity of facing it openly. The confrontation had transformed the emotional dynamics of our lives, and while healing would require time, the clarity provided by observation, preparation, and direct engagement offered a path forward. Through the intensity of confrontation, I learned the profound impact of truth, observation, and patience. The larger bed, the site of betrayal and exposure, remained central to the narrative, a symbol of both intimacy lost and clarity gained. The process of confronting deceit, while emotionally taxing, illuminated the path toward understanding, resolution, and eventual restoration. The emotional and psychological weight of the affair had been laid bare, and in the aftermath, I stood equipped with insight, evidence, and the opportunity to navigate the complexities of trust and healing with a clear vision of the truth. The aftermath of the confrontation settled over the house like a dense fog, heavy and unyielding. I could feel the weight of weeks of deception, observation, and emotional turmoil pressing down on me. Yet within that heaviness, there was a strange clarity. The truth had been revealed, unmasked in all its raw, unfiltered reality, and the layers of secrecy that had once clouded my perception were now stripped away. She sat on the edge of the larger bed, head bowed, the weight of exposure pressing upon her shoulders. The tall man, once confident and seemingly untouchable, now sat rigidly, every gesture betraying discomfort and acknowledgement of the consequences he faced. The room, our home, and especially the bed, had become the epicenter of accountability and reckoning. For hours, the air was thick with silence, punctuated only by occasional words that carried the weight of confrontation. I demanded explanations, seeking to understand the choices that had led to this betrayal, the motivations, and the depth of emotional involvement. She struggled to articulate her reasoning, stumbling through words that could not undo the gravity of what had occurred. The tall man offered nothing substantial defense, turned into evasive murmurs, and I realized that his presence had been a temporary assertion of dominance, fragile in the face of direct accountability. The confrontation was no longer a private speculation. It was a lived reality, an undeniable unraveling of the deceit that had invaded our lives. I spent those hours observing them, cataloging every detail of their reactions, noting the nuances in facial expressions, the subtle shifts in tone, and the micro-expressions that revealed guilt, fear, and recognition. The bed, the central fixture of intimacy and betrayal, seemed almost animate in its silent testimony, a tangible record of the acts it had silently witnessed. The enormity of its presence, both physical and symbolic, emphasized the emotional distance that had grown between us. Every fiber of its fabric carried the weight of secrets, the echoes of whispers, and the shadow of intimacy redirected toward another. The psychological complexity of the moment was profound. I felt a combination of vindication and sorrow, rage and exhaustion, the months of meticulous observation, the sleepless nights, the mental cataloging of behavior and evidence all culminated in this confrontation. The clarity of truth, though painful, offered a strange form of empowerment. I understood the full scope of the betrayal, the intentionality behind the actions, and the emotional investment that had been redirected. With clarity came control. I was no longer in the shadow of uncertainty but standing in the light of undeniable reality. As the conversation progressed, I noticed the subtle cracks in her demeanor. Her attempts at justification faltered under scrutiny. Her carefully constructed defenses, which had allowed her to navigate weeks of secrecy, were ineffective when confronted with irrefutable observation. Her eyes, once lively and expressive, now reflected the burden of guilt, the weight of accountability, and the dawning realization that actions have consequences that cannot be evaded. I felt a complex mix of emotions, grief for the intimacy that had been lost, anger at the violation of trust, and a strange sense of relief that the ambiguity had been removed. The tall man's reaction was equally telling. His confidence had dissipated, replaced by a subdued awareness of the reality he had helped create. The aura of invulnerability he had carried during clandestine interactions was gone, replaced by the recognition that secrecy, when unmasked, leaves no room for deflection. Every gesture he made, from the slight slump of his shoulders to the cautious movement of his hands, indicated the shift from dominance in the shadows to accountability in the light. Their presence together, once an act of clandestine intimacy, was now laid bare, vulnerable to judgment and consequence. I took the time to articulate the emotional toll, the betrayal of trust, and the disruption of shared life. My words, though controlled, conveyed the depth of anguish, the pain of exclusion, and the profound impact of their actions. She responded with fragments of apology, each one insufficient yet revealing the human vulnerability behind the choices made. The tall man remained largely silent, his acknowledgement implicit in body language rather than speech. The confrontation had stripped away all pretense. The emotional and physical consequences were undeniable, and the path forward would require acknowledgement, reckoning, and resolution. The bed, still central in the room, remained a stark reminder of the emotional divide. Its expanse, which had once symbolized comfort and shared intimacy, now represented the acts of betrayal that had taken place upon it. Each wrinkle in the sheets, each indentation in the mattress, seemed to tell a story of secrecy, of moments shared in private, and of the emotional and physical intimacy diverted away from me. The psychological weight of this realization was profound, yet it also provided a foundation for clarity, accountability, and the eventual process of healing. Over the following hours, the atmosphere shifted from raw confrontation to a cautious acknowledgement of reality. Words became fewer, but the understanding deepened. The truth, once suspected and now observed, had been laid bare. The bed, the home, and the interactions that had been meticulously hidden were now undeniable. The confrontation had not erased the betrayal, nor could it undo the emotional complexity it created, but it provided a framework for understanding, reflection, and the potential for resolution. I began to recognize the necessity of this confrontation, the importance of observation and preparation, and the value of facing reality directly, no matter how painful. Trust, once broken, requires acknowledgement, clarity, and accountability. The bed, larger than ever, remained a symbol of both the intimacy lost and the clarity gained. Its presence was a reminder that actions carry consequences, and that betrayal, when left unchecked, will inevitably surface. The confrontation had delivered clarity, exposed the emotional and physical realities, and provided a platform from which decisions about the future could be made. In the days that followed, the dynamics of our home shifted irrevocably. The emotional energy, once concentrated in secrecy and deception, and began to settle into a tense equilibrium. The bed, central to both the betrayal and the confrontation, remained a constant reminder of the events that had transpired. Healing, reflection, and the reconstruction of emotional boundaries became necessary. I understood that the process of recovery would be gradual, requiring deliberate effort, emotional honesty, and the willingness to confront the consequences of actions fully. The confrontation, while painful and emotionally taxing, had revealed the depth of deceit and the complexity of human relationships. The evidence I had gathered, the observations I had meticulously documented, and the patience I had exercised allowed me to confront the betrayal decisively. The larger bed, the silent witness to months of hidden intimacy, now stood at the center of a room defined by acknowledgement, clarity, and the beginning of reckoning. The emotional landscape, once clouded by suspicion, was now illuminated by the undeniable reality of truth. Through this confrontation, I recognized the profound value of clarity, preparation, and observation. The betrayal, now fully exposed, could not be denied or minimized. The bed, once a symbol of shared comfort and intimacy, had been transformed into a monument to the consequences of hidden actions. The tall man, the person who had intruded into our lives, now faced the undeniable weight of exposure, and she, confronted with her choices, had to navigate the ramifications of her actions. The home, central to this drama, had become a space of reckoning, where deception met accountability and clarity replaced uncertainty. The lessons of this confrontation were clear and profound. Trust, once fractured, demands confrontation and clarity. Observation, patience, and preparation are essential in navigating the complexities of human relationships and betrayal. The larger bed, central to both the acts of intimacy misappropriated and the exposure of truth, it remained a powerful symbol of both loss and understanding. The confrontation had delivered justice of a kind, revealed the depth of deceit, and provided the foundation for emotional recovery and the re-establishment of boundaries. The days following the confrontation were steeped in an uneasy, quiet, a tension that lingered in the air like a shadow, refusing to dissipate. The truth had been revealed. Exposure had been achieved. Yet the emotional consequences rippled through every corner of our home, leaving me suspended in a complex web of reflection, anger, and tentative understanding. I walked through rooms that had once been familiar, noting how the light fell across the larger bed, how the furniture seemed smaller now, how silence itself carried weight. The bed, central to the unfolding drama, remained a stark reminder of intimacy lost, of secrets exposed, and of the reckoning that had finally come to pass. She moved about the house with a constrained grace, her demeanor subdued, yet her eyes betrayed lingering emotions, guilt, sorrow, regret, perhaps even recognition of the depth of what had been broken. The tall man was no longer present, removed from the intimate sphere he had once quietly invaded. The absence of his imposing presence brought a strange relief, yet it was underscored by the weight of reality. The breach in trust remained, and the process of rebuilding had just begun. The bed, enormous and imposing, symbolized both the magnitude of betrayal and the expansive space for reflection and potential healing. I spent hours in contemplation, replaying the events of the confrontation in my mind, examining every micro-expression, every subtle gesture, and every word exchanged. The psychological toll was profound. The weeks of observation, planning, and emotional tension culminated in a mixture of exhaustion and clarity. I understood, perhaps for the first time, the delicate dynamics of human relationships, the fragility of trust, the complexity of emotional bonds, and the intricate ways in which intimacy can be redirected and misused. The bed, still the silent witness, seemed to absorb the emotional residue, its presence a constant reminder of both loss and revelation. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the emotional journey I had undergone, the initial suspicion, the careful observation, the sleepless nights, and the eventual confrontation had transformed me. The experience had forced me to confront not only her betrayal, but also my own responses, my patience, my vigilance, my endurance, and my capacity for both anger and understanding. The bed, central to the narrative of intimacy and deceit, became a metaphor for the complexity of human emotion, the layers of trust and betrayal, and the necessity of facing truth directly, no matter how painful. I began to consider the process of healing, recognizing that the emotional landscape of our home had shifted irreversibly. Trust, once fractured, would require deliberate effort to reconstruct. The transparency of confrontation had provided clarity, but clarity alone was insufficient for restoration. Boundaries had to be reestablished, emotional wounds had to be acknowledged, and the remnants of secrecy had to be fully processed. The bed, larger than ever, was both a witness and a symbol, a reminder of the past and a focal point for the journey ahead. Over time, I observed changes in myself as well. The intensity of vigilance that had consumed my daily life gradually softened into a cautious attentiveness, a measured awareness of both my environment and my emotional responses. The psychological weight of betrayal was still present, but it was accompanied by a growing resilience, a recognition that confronting reality, however painful, is a necessary step toward reclaiming agency and control over one's life. The bed, once a stage for clandestine intimacy, now represented a space for reflection, processing, and eventually, healing. I began to understand the importance of boundaries and self-preservation. The confrontation had been both a revelation and a liberation, exposing the full scope of deceit while providing a foundation upon which to rebuild. Each day, I moved through the home with renewed awareness, careful to engage with the physical and emotional spaces that had been tainted by secrecy. The bed, still central, became a site of contemplation rather than betrayal, a tangible reminder of the lessons learned through observation, patience, and confrontation. The process of rebuilding required both emotional and practical considerations. Conversations were held, boundaries were articulated, and the dynamics of our interactions were renegotiated. The truth, now fully revealed, allowed for honesty and accountability. Yet the emotional scars remained. The bed, occupying the same physical space as before, now served as a focal point for these difficult yet necessary exchanges, a constant reminder of what had been lost and what could potentially be reclaimed. Its presence underscored the gravity of the journey from betrayal to understanding, from secrecy to transparency, and from emotional upheaval to the first steps toward healing. In reflecting on the broader implications of these events, I recognize the profound importance of awareness, vigilance, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. The meticulous observation, the careful documentation, and the deliberate preparation that preceded the confrontation were not acts of obsession, but necessary strategies to reclaim clarity and agency. The bed, central to both the betrayal and the eventual confrontation, served as a powerful symbol of this process, a silent witness to deceit, a stage for revelation, and a foundation for reflection and eventual recovery. Healing, I realized, is a process that extends beyond the immediate confrontation. It requires continuous engagement with reality, acknowledgement of emotional wounds, and a willingness to navigate the complex interplay of trust, intimacy, and personal boundaries. The bed, once a repository of secrecy and betrayal, now became an emblem of resilience, the physical space around which reflection, processing, and eventual reconciliation could occur. The lessons embedded in this experience were profound. Truth, clarity, and deliberate confrontation are essential tools in navigating the emotional complexities of human relationships, and the courage to face betrayal is the first step toward restoration. In the weeks that followed, the household slowly shifted from a space of tension and surveillance to one of cautious normalcy. The larger bed, still imposing in the center of the room, became a space not of hidden intimacy, but of acknowledgement, reflection, and tentative rebuilding. Each interaction, each conversation, each step taken toward mutual understanding reinforced the lessons learned through observation, confrontation, and emotional endurance. The experience had left indelible marks on the psyche, yet it also provided a framework for resilience, clarity, and the careful reconstruction of trust and boundaries. Ultimately, the confrontation and its aftermath illuminated the profound interplay between observation, truth, and emotional integrity. The bed, as a silent witness to both betrayal and reckoning, remained central to the narrative, embodying the complexity of human relationships and the consequences of hidden actions. The process of confronting deception, processing emotional trauma, and establishing clarity provided a foundation for healing, self-awareness, and the restoration of personal agency. Through this journey, I learned that facing the truth, however painful, is an essential component of reclaiming control over one's life, rebuilding trust, and navigating the intricate landscape of intimacy and human connection. Betrayal cuts deep, but facing the truth, no matter how painful, is the first step toward healing and reclaiming your life. Observing carefully, preparing patiently, and confronting reality directly allow clarity to replace uncertainty and agency to replace helplessness. Trust is fragile, but it can be rebuilt through honesty, boundaries, and emotional awareness. Painful as it is, betrayal can teach resilience, reveal the strength within, and guide you toward a life where clarity and self-respect are prioritized. Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and we'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic, emotional stories that explore the complexities of human relationships and the power of confronting the truth.